If this book exists, you're in the wrong universe. Monday, August 22nd, 5:55 p.m. Gingerbread men. Hunger at 32%. Amy. Amy nervously watched the van's dashboard slurp up the road. They were heading right into the sun, the windshield feeling like a heat lamp that was turning them into jerky. Just a couple of minutes out from their destination, John said, "I know you don't like to fixate on worst-case scenarios, but let's say we get there and find that Bass has, already done the thing with the human skins. And let's say he's done it to his little sister. What do we do? With him, I mean." "We call the police and have him arrested. That is a crime. I'm sure I've heard that somewhere." "But what if we think the police can't hold him due to his, special abilities?" "Then we offer whatever help we can to the police in holding him." Amy felt like her tone made it clear she was done discussing it, and John apparently picked up on that, allowing Amy to stew in silence. They drove past the city's park with its dilapidated basketball courts and arrived at the mostly full parking lot by the fenced-off public pool. Up on a hill behind it was the dormant community center. "Look at that motherfucker!" screamed John. Amy followed his pointing finger and saw that in the parking lot was an undisclosed PD patrol car and, next to it, Detective Colfeur's sedan. Amy said, "Oh God, if the detective is already here..." "It means my dream was dead on. Dave can suck it." John took a photo of the cars and texted it to David, presumably with an attached message telling him to suck it. "Did anything else happen in the dream that might come true? Anything that might help us right now?" John hesitated, as if thinking. "It, seems unlikely." Amy immediately noted the dense, damp crowd around the pool. This wasn't a town where a lot of people had good pools of their own, so this one stayed busy. It was open until 7, so there was another hour of having lots of mostly naked bystanders in harm's way. Amy said, "We have to pass through the pool people to get to the community center. I assume that means you can't go striding through them with a giant flaming sword or whatever you've got back there." "Yeah, all those little kids would be bugging me to let them hold it. Let's see what we've got." They circled around to the sliding door side of the van. John pulled it open, and then both of them recoiled at what they found inside. Little Gracie Galveston was sitting there, a pink backpack on her lap, fiddling with one of the white magic dolls John kept on hand. Amy said, "Oh, it's you! You're alive! Oh, good. Wait, how did you get in here? Were you back here the whole drive over?" "He said you would give me a ride over here if I got in the back and kept quiet." Is that the right voice? I forget. "He said you would give me a ride over here if I got in the back and kept quiet. You should always check in the back before you drive away. What if, instead of a girl, I'd been a murderer? Or a bear?" "Bass told you that?" "Your husband did." "He did? When?" "Last night, in my room. He said either he or his friend would be here, depending on who won the coin toss this time. He said if I give you the book, then you can get Bass out of trouble. Is that right?" John said, "Do you have it?" "Can you get Bass out of trouble?" Amy said, "We can do our best. Is he here?" "Somewhere around here. I'm supposed to meet him." Gracie reached into the backpack. It was decorated with cartoon ponies, and brought out the Zarkrak's Portal book. She held it out to Amy. Gracie said, "I'm starting to get scared." Amy took the book and asked, "When all this began, did Bass tell you what the toy would do? Did he say what would come out of it?" "He said everything would be better. He said I'd get to see Silva again. He said he could make everything right. With her, I mean." "But you don't believe that now?" "I don't know. It all got weird. What is this book about? I tried to read it, but the words are all spelled wrong." "It's not about the words," said Amy. "Remember when I said your brother could do magic? Well, this is a magic book. It opens to some other place. It's like a little window, but it's very dangerous." "Bass does tricks for me. He can go into his room and make his hand come out of a drawer in mine. The first time he did it, I got really scared, and he had to come apologize. One time, I spied on him in the backyard. It was night, and he was standing there talking, and I thought he was on his phone, but he left his phone inside. He was just talking, having a conversation with the air. I watched him for a long time. I'm scared. I know I said before that I was just starting to get scared, but I was scared before, so I guess that was a lie. My stomach hurts all the time. Let me call your mom. She can come pick you up. I don't want to go home. I have to go to Bass. He's looking for me. You can't go to Bass. He's trying to... Amy had no idea how to explain this without traumatizing the girl. You could get hurt. What he wants to do, it might hurt you. Your parents are probably worried sick. Then let me stay with you. Amy leaned toward her and, in her most reassuring voice, said, Gracie, you can't. We're about to do something very dangerous. Amy pulled out her phone, and in the moment it took her to figure out that she didn't actually have Regina Galveston's number in her contacts, Gracie had taken off. Hey, Gracie, no! Amy only needed about 5 steps of pursuit before she realized Gracie was much, much faster than she was. The little girl flew out of the parking lot and down the sidewalk, pink backpack bouncing all the way. Amy pursued as best as she could. Then Gracie turned and ran into the park, across the basketball courts, into a playground where a few families were hanging out. Amy slowed to a stop, imagining having to explain to them why she was chasing down this child who clearly wasn't hers, especially if said child screamed bloody murder the moment Amy got close. Defeated and sweaty, Amy returned to the van to find John rooting around inside for gear. He glanced back at her and said, Whole family's fast. At least she's some distance away from Sebastian and whatever's about to happen here. John emerged from the van with the speech jammer, which just looked like a blocky black speaker attached to an elongated microphone and a pistol grip, and a music gun he had rigged up. It was a megaphone attached to an MP3 player that, at a moment's notice, could trigger In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, set right before that drum part. John went to give the latter to Amy, but she had the Zarkrax book in her only hand. I don't want to leave this here, she said, imagining some teenagers stealing it out of the van and getting sucked into the Phantom Zone. Do we have something we can put it in? John dug around in the van again until he found one of those ribbed metal suitcases like you see in spy movies. He opened it, dumped onto the floor bundles of some kind of foreign currency, and then locked the book inside the case and handed it to Amy. They ventured through the fence into the pool area, Amy carrying the suitcase, John dual-wielding his 2 ridiculous sound gadgets. They weaved through the pool crowd. Amy had confronted David in the past about the way he always described the town as an unending carnival of despair. No, not every structure was falling down, not every business was dying, and not every citizen was shambling under the weight of crushed expectations and meth withdrawal. The people at the pool, for instance, were having fun. Little kids were chasing one another around. Parents were laughing. The pool was functioning just fine as a pool, aside from a couple of Band-Aids Amy could see floating around in there. Past the pool there was a sidewalk and a set of wide concrete stairs that led up the hill to the dormant community center, a 2-story building audaciously built from not 1 but 2 shades of tan brick, with a row of tinted windows around the top like a headband. Only one of the windows was broken, as far as Amy could see. The words Undisclosed Community Center were printed on a sign positioned among the overgrown landscaping so that it appeared to be hiding in the bushes, like it was waiting to jump out and surprise them. If David were there, he'd note that the Y was missing. They didn't have to walk far before they found Detective Caulfier talking to a uniformed officer who looked young enough to be a trainee. The beat cop said, "Stop right there." But the detective waved him off and said, "I know these assholes." Amy took some pride in the fact that he didn't exclude her from the group description. John said, "Is Sebastian Galvatron here?" "You think he might be." "Isn't that why you're here?" The beat cop said, "There's a missing security guard." Amy sucked in a breath. Caulfier caught it, groaned, and said, "Tell me what you know." "Regina Galveston said her kids are both missing," said Amy. "We found Gracie in the parking lot, but she ran off. and in response to this report of missing children, you decided to come yourselves, instead of calling it in?" John said, "We knew you'd already be here. You're always a step ahead." "Shut the fuck up. A security guard said he heard screams inside the building. He went to check it out, immediately disappeared into thin air. That was a couple of hours ago. Pascal here got the call from a witness, and then he got spooked by what the witness told him. So he called me, and now we're waiting for the janitor to come unlock the building. What's in that suitcase?" Amy said, "Magic book." She glanced at the uniformed police officer, Pascal, not sure what details of their weird case could be shared with the rank and file. "There's a good chance that your missing person may be tied to all the other stuff that's going on, with the, group. The one that's collecting stuff from people." "The little floating bundle of eyeballs?" asked Pascal, the beat cop. "No," said John. "This is being done by something even more terrifying. Motivated nerds." "There's the janitor," said Coiffure. To Pascal, he said, "If we see anything weird, stay vague on the radio. If the others down at the station think it's monsters, they'll all show up. Everybody wants to be the goddamned X-Files. Until they have to do the paperwork." The elderly janitor took an infuriatingly long time to get the door open. Then, Coiffure pulled a gun out of a shoulder holster and gestured for Pascal to do the same. To John and Amy, he said, "You two stay out of our way." Me. I was on the sofa with a shotgun in my lap. The magpie egg was on the floor where I could keep an eye on it. John's laptop was on the cushion next to me, so I could monitor the exterior camera feeds. But the one watching the front lawn had gone out. Joy said the bird had turned up earlier and picked the camera free of its mount, knocking it into the grass. She insisted we couldn't fix it until the eggs in the nest had hatched and the baby birds had moved out. Otherwise, we'd be disturbing them. Joy had not been interested in arguing the point further. At this moment, she was finishing watching a recorded episode of The Bachelor, which had made her extremely angry. She turned off the TV, stood, and said, "Don't make a lot of noise. I have the midnight to 8 shift, so I'm going to get some sleep." Noise may be coming our way, whether we like it or not. Also, do you actually need to sleep? Do you need to sleep? Is it hard with your big floppy shoes and your nose making that honking sound all night? I'm asking a serious question. I may need your help if things go wrong. And by go wrong, I mean if they go the way they do in 95% of situations like this. What kind of help? I'm not going to help you kill anybody. That's the same as saying you're not going to help at all. She shrugged and answered a text she'd gotten. Who texts Joy? Without looking up from her phone, she said, "Oh, do you want some of that German chocolate cake I brought home? Or do you just eat clown food? Can we be serious for a moment?" Oh. Are you going to say you're in love with me? I just want you to answer a question. Really answer. Will you do that? She met my eyes. Depends on the question. I sat up straighter on the sofa and said, "Why are you here?" "Why are you here?" "So we can't just have this conversation? You're going to just keep dodging and repeating my questions back to me?" "I have this conversation all the time with other people. John got drunk one night and we talked for hours. He even cried. When we were in Japan, Amy asked me if I age or if I have dreams when I sleep. I told her. But no, I don't like having this conversation with you because you should already know. If those people out there, the normies, figure out what I am, they'll show up with torches and burn me alive." "And me along with you." "That's right. So it's like a hyena accusing a sheep of being a wolf. Nobody's accusing anybody. We're in a situation here where I may have to depend on you to not let me die. And to this day, I don't know how you operate. Or why. I don't know what you are when nobody's in the room with you. I don't know if you have thoughts of your own or if you just reflect back what you think we want to hear as part of the camouflage or whatever you call it." She crossed her arms. "Why are you wearing pants right now?" "What?" "I'm making a point. Why are you wearing pants? Think, and then give me your best answer." Because everyone gets mad if you walk around with your dick out?" "Right. And why do those people get mad?" "Because it's not the thing you're supposed to do." "In other words, they get mad because unspecified other people expect them to get mad. So you wear pants because other people expect you to, and those people expect you to because other people expect them to expect you to. Our personalities are just like water in mud puddles, filling in the holes of other people's expectations. No, that's where you're wrong. I exist as an individual outside of what I'm doing to please others. I mean, that's why I don't have any other friends. You've never squashed a thought inside your head because it's too weird or gross? You've never thought, what would Amy say if she knew I was thinking this? When you're making a decision, you never stop to ask yourself how it's going to look to others. What you think of as your amazing, unique, individual personality would be totally different if you'd been raised on a desert island. At this point, I don't even remember what my question was, but I definitely regret asking it. Do you want some of the cake or not? Wait, no, I remember now. Why are you here? Why are you here? Answer that, and then you'll know. Where else would I go? Nowhere, and it's for the same reason as me. Because you like it here. That's ridiculous. Do you want the cake or not? Obviously I do. It's on the counter. Go get it yourself. I'm putting on my pajamas. She went upstairs, and I headed for the kitchen, taking the shotgun with me, and occasionally glancing back at the magpie on the floor of the living room. From above me, Joy shouted, "Hey, I think you need to come take a look at this." John. The community center was as hot as a dwarven forge, and smelled slightly worse. Detective Coiffure and Pascal the beat cop had gone inside and told John and Amy to stay put, orders that they had broken about 2 minutes later. They ventured in to find a lobby still decorated with a faded banner welcoming everyone to the Kids Safety Safari, featuring a cartoon monkey with his arms around a happy little boy and girl. There were stairs to their right, but John advanced through a set of twin doors directly in front of him, into a gymnasium that was the only other room on the first floor. There were no windows in the gym. The space was all heat and shadow, the kind of stifling lightlessness you'd expect from hell itself. John immediately found himself at the entrance of a darkened tunnel, surrounded by tall, fake plants. The tunnel was constructed out of PVC pipes and trash bags, and decorated with plastic vines, set up as some kind of kids' safety presentation. At the entrance was a life-sized plywood gorilla with a speech bubble saying, "Welcome, kids. Do you have what it takes to make it out of the other side of the monkey tunnel alive?" John chewed a breath off the airless room and tightened his grip around both of his weapons. He heard the floor creaking and squeaking inside the tunnel. The shoes of the detective and the beat cop, or someone else? John turned to face Amy, the apprehension on her face lit by the meager shafts of light spilling from the doors behind them. Did they, in fact, have what it took to make it out of the other side of this tunnel alive? John didn't know, and he sensed that she didn't know either. If you think about it, isn't life itself one big monkey tunnel? He nodded, and together they stepped past the plywood sentry and into the black, crinkly bowels of the Kids Safety Safari. They had brought with them no flashlights, and John was already wondering if this was a fatal mistake. Illuminating the way with the meager light on Amy's cell phone, they soon passed another wooden primate, this one in a tiny cartoon car with a speech bubble above it that said, "If a stranger offers to pick you up, tell a grown-up right away." John took a step toward a blind corner. In the shadows beyond, he thought he could hear shallow breaths, could sense tense muscles coiled for an ambush. He raised one of his weapons. He couldn't remember which one was in which hand. He pivoted around the corner and found himself face to face with a tall figure sculpted out of hate. Its hair was perfect. "I told you to wait outside," said Detective Coiffure. "There's nobody in here." Amy said, "I didn't think there would be. The guys we're looking for probably need some more enclosed private space to do their work." As she was speaking, John saw a shadow looming behind the detective. John drew his other weapon, pointing it over Coiffure's shoulder. "Get down!" He didn't. The shape drew closer. John saw light reflecting off a pair of unfeeling eyes. "Yeah, nobody here," said Pascal the beat cop. "This place got a basement?" "No, the second floor is it," said Coiffure. Let's go. You two, go outside and wait. Or go home. I don't give a shit. The detective pushed past them and headed out toward the lobby and the stairs, his partner in tow. Instead of walking back through the monkey tunnel, Amy jiggled at the frame, and it all instantly collapsed around them. Something rustled under the plastic sheeting, and a very fat, annoyed raccoon waddled out. John caught up to Pascal just before he reached the door. "Hey," whispered John. "The detective said the witness's story scared you enough to call him in. What spooked you?" "It was called in by a girl who works the concession stand. She knew the guard. Says Lewis, that's the guard, heard the screams, but said the screams he heard were his own voice. Sounded like he was being tortured. He thought maybe it was some kind of prank, but where would somebody get a recording of his voice to do that? And why? Then the guard disappeared, and the concession girl called it in." He nodded toward the detective in the next room. "We got a standing procedure. When this kind of thing comes up, it gets dumped on him." John nodded. "If this turns weird, stay back and follow our lead. Got it?" "What do you mean by—" Pascal was interrupted by the sound of a man's scream from upstairs. He drew his gun and ran through the twin doors to the lobby. John and Amy followed, trailing the cops through the lobby and then up the stairs. They reached the top, turned, and emerged into a long hallway lined with doors. Shafts of sunlight stabbed into the hall from a window behind them, stretching their shadows along the tiled floor. The two cops were on high alert now, trying to prepare themselves for something no cop had ever trained for, unless they'd learned under some rogue instructor who began every class by dropping a buttload of acid. Keeping his voice low, John said, "This is hard to explain, but if one of these rooms contains a bunch of gingerbread man cookies, let me know, because that means there's been a terrible misunderstanding." Pascal threw open the first door, and both men swept the room through their gun sights from outside, then stepped in to check the corners. Stripes of sunlight from Venetian blinds illuminated stacks of folding chairs and wall posters listing the 12 steps of an addiction recovery program. "What the hell is that?" whispered Pascal. He was referring to a trio of square plastic vats on the floor. They were positioned where the meager light from the blinds would hit them, the walls coated with droplets of condensation, the bottom few inches filled with dirt. John approached, and the two cops led him, apparently figuring if it was a booby trap or a toxic substance, why not let him take the brunt of it? Inside each tub were some kind of mushrooms, dozens of them, vibrant purple with red at the tips. "Either somebody is growing shrooms in here," said John, "or else they did a terrible job of cleaning their storage tubs." They moved on to the next room, across the hall. Same procedure. Scan from outside. Check the corners. Inside were stacks of what appeared to be gymnastics mats and a big wooden box with a curtained window for puppet shows. John thought that would have been a pretty good place for a killer to hide, but found that kicking over the box while screaming revealed that no one was crouched back there. When he turned to head back out of the room, however, he froze at the sight of a tangle of gnarled faces piled in one corner. "Hey, faces! Shit! We got severed faces! Faces!" Amy popped into the room, her green eyes wide. But as soon as she did, John realized it was just a pile of puppets. Still, he went over and gave the pile a thorough kicking, then closed the door securely behind them when he left. John had never been attacked by a puppet, but it was for the same reason he'd never been bitten by a snake. He knew when to exercise caution. From somewhere came another scream, sounding like the same man from before. Their missing security guard, apparently. It was impossible to tell where the sound was coming from. It almost seemed to be emanating from the hallway itself, like the missing man was already a wraith haunting his crime scene. If so, he wasn't visible in the hall. The two cops threw open the door of the next room. The floor was all but covered in 3-foot-wide spheres that John immediately assumed must be some kind of giant monster eggs, but closer examination revealed them to be yoga balls. 2 rooms left. In the next was stacked boxes of plastic cups, paper plates, and printed t-shirts for the undisclosed July 4 Forest Fire Recovery Fund Fun Run. Amy said, "Look, by the door." She was looking at the floor, where there was a cluster of black circular stains, like dried blood from a robot that had cut her finger. John knew why she'd called attention to it, but he knew this wasn't the black substance they called Arby's sauce. That stuff didn't stay put. A further search of the room revealed a couple of boxes of used black candles, which was absolutely part of any occult summoning starter kit. The room, however, contained nothing more of note. Just as they stepped back into the hall, there was another scream, emanating from every direction at once. John suddenly had a memory of their first feeding of the magpie. A cry beamed directly into their heads. They moved on to the final door. Locked. No, stuck. None of these doors had locks in the handles. Something was blocking it from the inside. Coiffure motioned to Pascal, both men moving silently now. The beat cop reared back and kicked the door. It didn't budge. Another attempt. Same result. Coiffure gave it a try, but it was like it had been nailed shut. Almost as if in response, there was a sound of a hollow knock, a single bang of a fist on a surface. But the sound wasn't coming from the other side of the closed door. It was coming from Amy's suitcase. There was another knock, then a jolt that shook the suitcase in Amy's hand. The lid burst open. Me. I found Joy in her bedroom, standing in front of her closed closet door. She was wearing a tank top and very short lycra shorts. My gaze lingered 1 second too long, and the next time I blinked, she had instantly changed into baggy pajama pants and a t-shirt. I took a bite of the cake I was holding on a saucer and said, "I'm going to start a I think you need to see this jar, where we have to put $1 in every time we say it." She said, "Open the closet." I know it opens into John's room now. I helped knock the wall out. Open it. I really wanted to ask Joy what I was going to find in there, but knew she wouldn't tell me. In theory, I should just get a view into John's bedroom, obstructed only by hangers full of Joy's blouses and skirts. I handed her my cake saucer, sighed, and pulled the closet door open. I was looking at water, a vertical slab of it that stood a few inches into the closet. I expected it to splash into the room and flood the house, but it just stayed there, defying gravity. The surface was perfectly smooth, no ripples or waves. Beyond it, I could see daytime sky, like we were looking up from just below the surface. I said, "Huh." I stuck my finger into it. Just water. Nothing special about it, aside from the way it was behaving. Joy, through a mouthful of my cake, said, "You see the water, right?" "Yeah." "If you go into John's room and look from the other side, it's normal. Just the hole in the wall in either my room or the back of the door, depending on whether or not it's open." I again said, "Huh. So what do we do?" "I don't know. I mean, is this a portal to the ocean or something? What happens if you go into John's room and try to walk through from the other side?" "No idea. Go try it." "I'm definitely not doing that. Best case is I get wet. Worst is I get teleported to God knows where. Maybe we should just try throwing something through it instead." She took another bite of cake and said, "Why?" "I don't know. See if we can figure out how it works." Joy pointed at it with her icing-smeared fork and said, "I know I'm not the professional here, but maybe we should instead be preparing for if something dangerous comes swimming out of it." John. Detective Coiffure and beat cop Pascal turned their guns toward Amy just in time to see an entire human skin fly out of the suitcase she was holding. It flopped to the floor of the hall with a slimy thwap. John saw ragged cuts and veiny fat. He saw tangles of matted, bloody salt and pepper hair at one end. He saw features that said this skin had belonged to a large, middle-aged man, and then he forced himself not to look at it anymore. Amy dropped the open suitcase and screamed. Pascal said, "That's him! That's the security guard! They fucking skinned him!" Coiffure pointed his gun at John, even though Amy had been holding the suitcase that had just unleashed the hide. John felt like this was somewhat unfair. Clearly this act had been performed by some kind of supernatural means. Wouldn't a small woman be just as capable of that? John dropped his sound gadgets and put his hands in the air as a show of surrender. "Everybody be calm," he said, despite knowing that the human nervous system does not respond to voice commands. It's not what you think, but it's going to be hard to explain." With his hands held above him, John moved toward the suitcase and, in slow motion, grabbed the Zarkrak's book and held it up. "I know this doesn't make sense," he said, "but the skin came from this book. The people doing the skinning, they're at another location. We don't know where, but they're using the book to pass things through." "You stupid asshole," noted Kofir. "If somebody asks why you have human body parts in your suitcase, you say, 'That's not my suitcase.' Get on the ground and put your hands behind your head." John got to his knees, but no further. Amy did the same. To Pascal, Amy said, "If you've never handcuffed somebody like me, you just cuff my right and put the other cuff around a belt loop and back." "Shut up," barked Kofir. "I'm not dumb enough to arrest you. The paperwork is a goddamn nightmare. I need you to tell me exactly what is about to happen here and who else is in danger." John said, "It's actually not complicated. The weirdos collecting body parts need 2 more skins after this one. We don't know whose, and we don't know how they intend to get them. Sebastian Galvatron is one of the weirdos, maybe the main weirdo, and we only came here because we know he hangs out here and had no other idea. That's it. That's all we've got." Amy said, "And sometimes objects fly out of this magic book. But I know that's a sensitive subject, so we don't need to dwell on it. We need to find Bass, and if I had to bet, I'd say he and his cult have been using that locked room to do cult stuff. As for who's in danger, in the short term, any of us. In the long term, all of us." Kofir turned to say something to Pascal, who was staring at the bloody pile of skin on the floor and looking like his brain was spitting out nothing but blinking red error messages. "Hey, look at me. We need to—" Kofir stopped at the sound of footsteps behind him, on the stairwell. John said, "Oh, there he is now." Bass did not look surprised to see them. Kofir aimed his gun and said, "You, on the floor, right now." Instead of obeying, Bass reached out and, just as John had seen him do back in his yard, made his hand vanish. John just had time to think, "I should have worn the foreskin vest," before Bass's disembodied hand appeared right above the Zarkrak's book in the open suitcase. It grabbed the book, and then both hand and book vanished. When John turned back toward Bass, he was holding the book, already heading back down the stairs. "After him!" screamed John as he scrambled to his feet, picking up his sound gadgets. "If he gets away with that book, the unimaginable happens." Everyone ran after Bass, John leaping down the last 4 steps, stumbling and almost falling on his face. Bass blew through the front doors and ran outside, toward the crowded pool area. John slammed into the doors just as they were closing, knocking them open again with his face and forearms. He aimed his Phil Collins gun at the boy's back, having no idea if it would have any effect, but also knowing that 2 decades of smoking cigarettes would not allow him to catch up to the teenager on foot. John squeezed the trigger, and the "In the Air Tonight" drums blasted out at ear-piercing volume. Bass, who apparently mistook this for gunfire, instinctively dropped to the ground. John ran up and kicked the book from Bass's hands as the 2 cops arrived, their guns trained on the teenager's back. The crowd of pool revelers nearby went silent, some drifting over to see if this particular situation promised hilarity or unimaginable horror. John leaned over Bass. "Are there any more victims? I know you need 2 more. Do you have them somewhere? If they're still alive, it's not too late. Are they up in that room? If they're just partially skinned, the doctor can probably fix that. Easy as re-peeling a banana." From the ground, Bass said, "You wouldn't understand the answer, even if I told you." "What would your parents think of this?" Bass laughed. Amy showed up, picking the Zarkrak's book out of the grass and holding it against her chest with both arms. Kofir nodded toward Pascal and said, "Cuff him. We'll get an answer." John turned to the gathered crowd of damp rubberneckers and said, "Back off, everybody. This is none of your business. He's just a kid and—" The Zarkrak's book Amy was holding belched out another full human skin, like a snake from a can of prank peanuts. The children in the crowd shrieked in terror. Amy dropped the book, then got down and put her knees in the cover, like she could somehow save the next victim by keeping the cursed book closed. It was very rare that John saw Amy at a total loss as to what to do, and it wasn't doing wonders for his confidence. "Oh my God," she said, through hitching breaths, looking at the twisted suit of skin in the grass. "We're too late. John, oh my God, oh my God." The detective brought his gun closer to Bass and said, "Who is that? Where's the body? Where are you keeping them? Talk or I'll put a hollow point in your kneecap." John leaned over the wad of skin, noting that it was covered in dark body hair, along with smears of blood in the shape of strong, grabby fingers, and, "Look at the arms," said John, as he kicked a tanned strip of deflated human skin. "This one has a full sleeve of tattoos. Should be identifiable." Pascal, the beat cop, looking like his sanity was cleaning by sweaty fingertips, rushed over. He took one look at the skin and said, "Bullshit. Bullshit. That's bullshit." Amy said, "What?" "That's bullshit." He pointed his gun at Bass. "How are you doing this? What the fuck is going on?" Kofier said, "Hey, get a hold of yourself. I take it you recognize him." Without a word, Pascal simply rolled up his sleeve. John said, Amy said, "Now, be calm. It's just an illusion. He's trying to mess with you." "Or maybe the victim just had the same tattoo." Pascal said, "That's me. Look at the hair. Look at the other shoulder. Some tattoo over there. How is this possible? Tell me!" From the ground, Bass said, "You'll find out." Pascal gritted his teeth and kicked the boy in the ribs like he was trying to punt him out of the city. John sensed Amy struggling at his feet. She was wrestling with the book, trying to keep the cover closed with all her meager weight. Someone from inside punched the cover so hard that the book bounced out from under her, landing face down in the grass a foot away. She reached for it at the exact moment another sticky suit of human skin puked itself out from inside. More children screamed. Several adults joined them. John wondered exactly how they would describe these events in the police report. A brief check of this third skin told John what he'd already guessed. The hair on it wasn't as perfectly sculpted as it was on the detective standing in front of him, but it was clear that it once had been. Kofier said, "Oh, fuck off," and snatched the book off the ground. He examined it as if it would contain some kind of explanation that would cause all this to suddenly make perfect sense. Amy, her voice shaking, said, "Be careful with that." John thought she was on the verge of fainting. Kofier opened the cover and actually held his gun up to the book, like he was ready to shoot whatever tiny human flaying gnomes lived inside. He was visibly disappointed in what he found, which to his eyes was likely just a nearly unreadable book by and for nerds. He said, "How is it?" A brick flew out from the book and smashed him in the nose. What the? Kofier dropped the book, blood squirting through the fingers he'd pressed to his face. Bass seized the opportunity. He sprang to his feet in a way that should not have been shocking for a high school athlete, and yet still managed to surprise everyone involved. He snatched the book and sprinted through the crowd of damp swimmers, rounding the pool and heading toward the restrooms, a small, white cinder block building with 2 openings for the men's and women's. John pursued, shouting at the clammy bystanders to clear the way. He had no idea where Bass thought he was going, if he had any plan at all. The restrooms were a dead end, and if he intended to circle around them, he'd find a fence that he'd struggle to climb before John caught up. That meant either Bass was operating out of blind panic, and nothing about his manner said he was, or he had some kind of unthinkable curveball in mind. Bass headed right for the men's restroom and slipped inside the door. John skidded to a stop and took a moment to remind himself which hand held the speech jammer. He pulled open the men's room door and raised his gadget. What he should have seen, if his memory was correct, was a few feet of floor and then a white brick separator to block the view of the other people pissing inside. Turning and walking a few feet should have given him a view of a stall to his right and 2 urinals to his left. He saw none of that. Instead, he was looking at a vast, dim interior, a space 50 times larger than the building housing it. There were puddles on the floor. It smelled like 10,000 infected wounds. It wasn't the exact room they had glimpsed through the window of the Zarkrak's book, but it could easily be another wing of the same facility, or another spot in a world where everything looked like that. Detective Caulfier arrived and shoved John aside, leading with his gun. He stepped into the impossible space, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he was no longer in the small restroom that should have been there. He yelled, "Bass! Give yourself up before you make this worse. You're a minor, they'll go easy on you. Make this hard and they'll never get the chance. You hear me?" Pascal showed up next and stopped cold, first staring inside the impossibly vast room, and then looking around at the small white hut it existed in, as if to confirm he hadn't taken a wrong turn somewhere. His gaze landed on John, wordlessly pleading for guidance. John said, "Wait," and then shouted to Caulfier, "Get the hell out of there, man! Look around you!" Caulfier, so inflamed with rage that the logic part of his brain had gotten swallowed in the blaze, kept going and motioned for Pascal to follow. He dutifully obeyed, gun aimed at the floor, presumably thinking about all the people in his life who had told him to not take this job. John stood at the entrance and watched as the two men moved farther away, now so far from him that by all rights they'd not only be outside of the restroom, but on the verge of crossing the parking lot outside the fence. Caulfier's posture was that of a man who knew the situation was insanity, and was so pissed off by it that he was determined to find the cause and shoot it until the world returned to normal, even if it meant taking a break halfway through to go buy more bullets. Something grabbed the back of John's shirt. He jumped and readied himself to Phil Collins, the assailant. Something grabbed the back of John's shirt. He jumped and readied himself to Phil Collins, the assailant, to death, then saw it was Amy, pulling him back. "Get away! John, get away from it!" she yelled at the cops. "Hey, it's a trap! Get out here and help get the kids away!" John turned back to see that the kids she referenced were several teenagers from the pool crowd that had wandered over, thinking they were going to see some kind of high-stakes toilet standoff between the cops and one of their classmates, if not the resurrected zombie of Ed Gain. At least 3 already had their phones out, recording. It was just a reflex for them at that point. John turned back to the portal and recoiled so hard he almost fell down. A huge, sweaty, hairy man had materialized in the restroom doorway, facing inside. The reason he seemed to materialize is that, as far as John could tell, the portal was freestanding in that other world, and this guy had walked through it from John's direction. So there was actually a split second where John thought he could see the pink interior of the man, complete with beating heart. But now he was looking at the dude's sweaty back, which was crisscrossed with leather straps. He appeared to be wearing an apron, a heavy one, like you'd see in the part of the slaughterhouse where they have to chop entire cows in half. He was striding steadily away from John and toward the cops. Then a second figure stepped into view in exactly the same way. A glimpse of innards, and then a broad back and a bald head. He wore modern but weathered armor and tattered black fatigue pants, all of it looking like it had been pulled off a corpse on a battlefield. In one hand, he held what appeared to be an axe whose handle was made of a human thigh bone, the head a ragged piece of scrap metal with a serrated edge. On the other hand was a set of wrist-mounted hooks that extended forward like foot-long talons. Talon Man himself seemed briefly confused, looking left and then right before turning to face John and Amy. That's when John saw that the man wore a mask made of chiseled black stone, with 2 narrow slits for eyes and a yellow cross painted on the bottom half. He started walking in John's direction. John felt Amy tugging on the back of his t-shirt again, urging him away. But for some reason, John had it in his head that the Talon Man couldn't leave the place/time/dimension he existed in, even though the 2 police officers had just made the trip in the opposite direction with no problem. Mainly, John couldn't visualize this giant Mad Max motherfucker just wandering around the undisclosed public pool, striding through the wet moms and crying toddlers wearing their pool floaties. And yet, the man stepped right over the threshold of the 2 worlds, emerging from the restroom into the sunlight. He turned his masked face up to the sky, as if briefly fascinated by the color. John backed up far enough to be out of axe-swinging range several times over, but not, as he noted to himself, out of axe-throwing range. The Talon Man advanced once again, and John retreated in turn. "Hey, turn around!" yelled John to the cops inside. They were far enough into that other world that he wasn't sure they'd be able to hear him. They did. Coiffure and Pascal pivoted to see the hairy man in the leather apron right behind them, now with some kind of curved blade in his right hand. Coiffure raised his gun and yelled cop commands. The hairy apron man ignored them. There was a gunshot and then a man's scream, but John didn't see what had happened because he turned his attention to the Talon man, who was continuing to move steadily toward him. John heard parents behind him urging their kids away. The bystanders finally realizing that the only thing between them and the unfathomable horror was John, and there was always that tiny chance he might let something slip past. John pointed the speech jammer at the Talon man, hoping he would mistake it for a real gun that could actually damage him. "Stop! Drop your weapons!" He stopped, but nothing about his posture registered any kind of alarm. He did not drop his weapons. Inside the restroom dimension, John saw that more weirdly armed butchers had shown up. The two cops started firing. One filthy dude went down, then another. Amy yelled for them to get out of there. Pascal looked toward her, but there were now several men between him and the doorway, and Detective Coiffure was focused on the fact that there were still people in that world he hadn't shot yet. John said, "Wait here," to Amy, and headed in their direction, with no plan for how he would extract the two men whose skins were lying in the grass behind him. After just 2 steps, the entire world containing the hairy apron man and the 2 cops just shrank. The entrance became smaller and smaller until it was a foot-tall square on the floor, and then it fell over, and a leather cover slapped closed. Where the threshold between worlds had been now was only the Zarkrax book, lying on the concrete that was damp with pool water footprints. Beyond it was now just the restroom's familiar interior of white painted brick covered in ink pen graffiti. And, standing right inside the door, was Bass. The teenager snatched the book off the floor and ran out of the restroom, toward the pool. John said, "Hey, let them out of there! Those are cops, Bass! Hey!" Bass ran up to the Talon man, who was still standing where John had told him to stop. It was then that John realized the man had merely been waiting for Bass to show up with instructions. As he ran past, Bass barked something at the man that didn't sound like English, then inexplicably continued running right toward the swimming pool. Bass stopped at the edge, chucked the Zarkrax book into the water, then turned to face John. He opened his mouth to say something. Panicking at the thought of having some kind of spell cast on him, or even worse, Amy, John raised the speech jammer and squeezed the trigger. Bass started to say words that were immediately echoed back much louder, creating a sort of sonic double vision that immediately gave John a headache. Bass tried talking through it, as everyone does when faced with the speech jammer. Then, confusion washed over his face, and his mouth fell closed. Bass scanned the people around him as if trying to spot someone, then dove into the water. A moment later, Talon Man followed his lead, jumping in feet first. John ran up to the pool with Amy in tow. When he arrived, he found the pool was empty, aside from the Zarkrax book, which floated there silently. Amy jumped in, opened the book, then said something that John almost thought was an expletive. She tossed the book up onto the tiles at poolside. John said, "What is it?" then opened the book, keeping his face out of the path of any projectiles. There was no need. The book was, now, just a book. He asked, "Did you hear what Bass was trying to say before I jammed him? Was it a hex?" Amy climbed out of the pool and said, "I only heard the first 2 words. Where's Gracie?" Me. I shut the closet door, noticing for the first time that on the other side, Joy had hung a presumably fake newspaper clipping. It was a photo of her holding a clearly photoshopped fish, under the headline, "Local Woman Snags Record-Breaking Trout." I said, "How about we barricade it? If something is going to come through the magic water, we can at least make it harder for them, or buy ourselves time to do something." "Barricade it with what?" asked Joy. "And don't tell me to scoot the bed over here. That's a new mattress. I don't want some squid creatures sliming it up." "Let's see what John has in his garage." Something crashed against the door, flinging it open. Bass Galvatron flew horizontally out of the water, landing on the floor, soaking wet. He tried to stand up and immediately tumbled over, as if gravity was running in a different direction from what he'd been expecting. I reached for the shotgun and realized I hadn't brought it up with me because I'd been carrying the cake. I said, "Stay on the floor. Where's—" Before I could finish my question, a second, much larger man came sailing into the room like he was doing a flying drop kick, accompanied by a spray of water. His boots slammed my back, and I fell on top of Bass. The teenager shoved me off him. He was stupidly strong, and jumped to his feet. I rolled over in time to see Bass barking instruction at his henchman, then run out of the room. Whatever language or jargon Bass and the henchman were using, I now knew the phrase for "kill that fucking guy." The masked man raised a truly ridiculous weapon, some kind of bone axe, and brought it down. I rolled out of the way, and the axe crashed into the floor behind me so hard that it shook the house. I said, "Joy, run!" I rolled back over just in time to see Joy break the cake saucer over the masked man's head, which he barely noticed. He swung at her with a wrist-mounted claw thing and missed. Joy had dropped to the floor, where she grabbed the sharpest shard of broken plate and stabbed it into the back of the man's leg, behind the knee. He definitely noticed that. The man stumbled backward, reaching down to extract the embedded shard. Joy pulled me to my feet and dragged me into the hallway. We closed the flimsy wooden bedroom door behind us and bounded down the stairs. We spilled out into the living room and found that the magpie egg was gone, and so was Bass. The front door was still standing open. The shotgun was still on the sofa where I left it. I ran over, grabbed it, and went back to the bottom of the stairs, just in time to hear the door to Joy's bedroom explode and the huge man stride to the top of the staircase. I aimed the laser dots right at his chest. He was wearing some kind of black tactical gear that looked plausibly bulletproof, but I wasn't a skilled enough shot to do anything but aim vaguely at the center of him and hope for the best. "I hope you like your ribs barbecued, bitch," is what I'd think to say later, but did not at the time. I pulled every trigger I could get my fingers around. I think 3 barrels successfully fired their shots. The masked man dropped like a sack of pig heads. I tried to catch my breath, then found Joy next to me and said, "We have to go after—" I heard a groan from above. The masked man was, in fact, still moving. I had no more shells for the shotgun, and the ammo was stored up in John's gun safe, behind the spot where the huge man was in the process of rallying himself to his feet. I said to Joy, "Do you have any, special abilities? In your other form, I mean." "Do you? What do you mean? I can't do anything like that." "David, what do you think we've been talking about all this time?" The huge masked man was now in a sitting position. He had a ragged tear in his chest armor, but I didn't see blood. The man stood, adjusted his mask, and looked around for his axe. Joy grabbed my elbow and said, "Come with me." Joy pulled me into the kitchen, heading toward the door to the garage. I heard pounding footsteps behind us and took a detour around the kitchen table, past the refrigerator, scanning the crowded counter for anything that could possibly kill or at least slow the masked freak. John's block of knives, a food processor, the coffee maker. I knew from memory that the 3 drawers below them contained silverware, baggies of weed, and fast food condiment packets, respectively. In the 1 second it took me to scan all that, the masked man had entered the kitchen, now right behind me. I reached for the first thing my hands could find. The door of the black cabinet next to the refrigerator, the one with the "Do Not Open" sticker on it. I braced myself. Then I yanked it open just as I heard Joy say, "No!" For a tense, silent moment, nothing happened. And then the avalanche came. Out from the cabinet sprang hundreds of compressed, crumpled wads of plastic grocery store bags, years and years worth. John kept insisting he was going to recycle them someday, claiming you weren't supposed to put them in the trash. The masked man was startled by the spray of bags falling and unspooling at his feet. He'd apparently never seen them before, and was thus unsure of what the second stage of the assault would entail. It only took him a couple of seconds to realize there wasn't one. He swung his axe, which whooshed through the open door of the bag cabinet and turned it into a cloud of splinters. The axe embedded itself into the floor. Joy said, "Duck!" I did. She'd picked up the glass decanter from the coffee machine. It was full. The coffee had been sitting on the burner all day, and even when fresh, John's coffee could strip the grease off an engine block. Joy bashed the pot into the huge man's mask so hard that it exploded. Hot brown acid poured in through the eye holes. He growled and stumbled backward, then tripped. He smacked his skull on the edge of the counter behind him with a noise like a baseball bat connecting with a watermelon. He went down, but I was sure he wasn't dead. I wasn't even confident he was knocked out. I grabbed the next appliance off the counter, the food processor. I yanked off the plastic bowl to expose the blade, punching the highest speed, and then lunged the spinning blade toward the prone man's groin. The machine died in my hands. I had pulled its stupidly short power cord from the socket. "Damn it! Joy, find me an extension cord." Instead of doing that, Joy said, "Move!" and grabbed me again, pulling me through the garage. As soon as we were inside, she slammed the door behind us, even though we both knew it wouldn't delay him any more than a chalk line on the floor that declared the garage was outside of the combat area. I assumed Joy would grab some hidden arsenal John had stashed out here, but instead, she ran over to the camera that was still focused on the spot of floor where the containment box used to be. She checked to make sure it was off. She said, "It'll be easier to clean up the mess out here." "What? What are you going to do?" "We're going to do it together." "Do what?" The door exploded off its hinges. The masked man stepped into the room and twirled his bone axe like it weighed no more than a plastic toy. He showed no sign that the damage we'd inflicted so far had even mildly inconvenienced him. If anything, he just seemed invigorated by it, like he needed to take a couple of blows to really get into an ass-kicking rhythm. Joy said, "You already know how to do it. Just feel what you're cleaning to inside and let it go." Amy. John was driving too fast. They'd hurried to the van for 2 reasons. They wanted to get away from the pool before more police came and tied them up with impossible questions, and because they had both tried to call David and gotten no response. John said, "The bad guys are already at the house. I know they are. They have the skins. They just need to feed them to the egg." John was one of those people who comforted himself by repeating the main plot points out loud. As for the 3 human skins, right after Bass and his partner dove into the pool, John and Amy had doubled back for them, only to find greasy pink smears on the ground where they had been. Either Bass's Zarkrax nerd friends had followed behind and gathered them up in the chaos, or if they'd been zapped away by some otherworldly means. It was the same result either way. If a bunch of pool kids had just grabbed the skins and started playing with them, they'd have noticed. Amy had the damp Zarkrax book in her lap, holding it closed with her hand, but not getting the sense it was necessary. To her and John both, the pages were now just regular wet paper, full of corny text written by some cult leader talking about how reality isn't real, etc. She studied the weirdly complex pattern on the cover. As a logo, it was hopelessly overdesigned. Hundreds of interlocking lines that branched off into grids, like the whole thing had been scrawled without lifting the pen from the paper. As a religious symbol, it wasn't exactly the kind of thing you could wear on a chain around your neck. How are these idiots going to be the ones to ruin the world? Wait, what was she saying? Of course it would be someone like this. John said, "We're here," in case he was worried Amy thought they were pulling up to a different black and yellow house. The front door was standing open. Her heart dropped. John stopped the van in the street and ran in through the gate and the open front door. Both of them immediately looked to the spot in the living room where the egg had been, saw that it was gone, and didn't say a word about it. Something caught John's attention, and he headed through to the kitchen. Amy followed and sucked in a breath when she saw the door to the garage had been obliterated. She pushed past John, and the first thing she saw was a lot of blood on the floor. There was a man lying in the middle of it with a ragged hole in his chest. The hole went all the way through, like his heart had been dug out of him. His severed head was lying across the room near splatters that implied it had bounced off a wall. David was sitting against the big white garage door, looking dazed. Joy was standing on the other side of the room, her eyes wide, breathing hard. Whatever had occurred, they had just missed it. Amy said, "Oh my God, what happened? Are you okay?" "Yeah," said David, as if he was surprised to find himself there. "I think so. I blacked out, or skipped forward. Did anybody else?" Amy said, "No, I don't think so. Joy, are you all right?" Joy blinked. "What? Sure. Yes. Everything is fine. A teenager flew out of your closet and stole your haunted toy. He got away. This guy came too. And now he's dead. That's his head over there, I think." "What happened to him?" "I don't recall," said Joy. "I also skipped ahead to just now. Both of us. We both have just no memory of what happened here over the last few minutes or so. Everything is fine. Fine. Fine." David said, "I'm not feeling well." John said, "They got their skins, all three of them. One of them belonged to Detective Kofier. He's gone, I think. It was confusing. I think they collected his skin before they killed him, like they had the result before the process, because of time magic or something. The cops might be after us. I have a headache." Amy said, "I'm not worried about the police coming here. They have dozens of witnesses and a bunch of videos showing 2 officers entering a restroom and never coming out. I don't see how they arrest us for that. I mean, we do have a dead body on the floor, I guess." David said, "I think I'm going to be sick." He stumbled to his feet and went into the house, through to the tiny bathroom on the first floor. Joy followed him, for some reason, and Amy followed her. David closed the bathroom door behind him, and Joy pressed up against the door and said something to him that Amy didn't quite catch, but it sounded like, "Close your eyes, don't look at what comes up."